Hello, my name is Paul Rogers and I'm the founder of DPO Solutions. Preparing for security interviews is challenging in 2026. I've worked in this space for over 30 years and have been both sides of the table as an interviewee and as an interviewer. And I've seen the complexity in the field increase and the lines blur between security and knowing other disciplines like project management, auditing, and certain legal areas. In today's world, interviewing in security often seems to be about your ability to get past AI job pre-screening algorithms and being able to talk about any one of 1,000 security acronyms while providing examples of security products and services that are available in multi-cloud environments. The truth is, even if you're experienced, you need to be ready for the questions where your answers just roll off the tongue, which of course takes practice. This is why I decided to compile this list of questions from memory and notes that I've kept on security interviews over the last few years. You'll notice that many of these questions are open-ended, scenario-based in their nature, which in my experience is a more common format used by interviewers. This represents a more nuanced questioning style where hiring managers want to probe your approach and rationale behind your decision-making rather than just memorizing terms. Hence, I would rate these questions in the medium difficulty category and more likely to be useful for somewhat more experienced security professionals. So as a general recommendation to security interviews in 2026, I would take the time to read the latest annual industry reports like that from the IC3, Horizon DBIR, Ponemon Institute, and IO, taking note of the top concerns in their executive summaries. Links to these reports are in the description. I would also be ready to talk about at least 3 projects you worked on, what the security challenges were, and how you overcame them. I've included question tips along the way in some of the questions marked with the light bulb. And as this is a community-based channel, I encourage you to leave a comment with your interview questions that you may have come across. And of course, if these questions help you get the job, I'd love to hear about it. So lastly, before we start, I want to make you aware that the 30 questions featured here are available for download, along with additional links to resources on security terms and descriptions, which may be useful for helping you better understand questions that you may encounter along the way. There's also a candidate assessment form for interviewers to help them grade interview candidates for security positions, which is a major time saver. Further information is provided in links in the description, and you can reach me on paul@data-privacy.io if you have any questions. The email is there on the slide. So having all that said, let's get started with the questions.
Question 1. What does the term supply chain risk mean to you, and can you give me an example? So for an answer for this one, I would say it involves threats which may be cyber and physical that exploit third-party relationships to compromise, steal from, or disrupt an organization. The MOVEit breach of 2023 exploited file transfer software to steal data from numerous organizations. The SolarWinds breach of 2020 was where attackers breached software updates to compromise thousands of customers. Both of these suppliers were trusted vendors, but their software updates were hijacked by cybercriminals with malicious payloads. Question 2. Can you tell me about a recent security incident you encountered and how you dealt with it? The interviewer is looking for several things here. So firstly, I would say is that you can demonstrate practical experience in the area of incidents, and then second, that you have used an established framework. So be prepared to talk about a serious or potentially serious incident such as a breach or malware outbreak, and what process you use to deal with it, which is of course hopefully aligned with an incident response framework like NIST, SBA 861, revision 3, or the SAN security framework, which is also very common. I would say here as a tip is that expect that half of your questions are scenario based for most security interviews you'll come across. Interviewers want to know what you followed in terms of a defined process so that they know that you didn't try to wing it and that you have that you can solve problems independently. without creating a drag on your management in terms of having to help you every time there's an incident. So question 3, can you tell me about any specific AI threats you've come across in your experience, what they were and how you would deal with them? So the interview is testing your awareness of AI threats like deepfakes, phishing and phishing emails. Specific tools you might find out there would be like Reality Defender, Intel's Fake Catcher, and Sensity AI, which are examples of products with fake media detection. And then there's Checkpoint Harmony and Barracuda systems, which are examples for email phishing, AI email phishing detection. These tools have reporting dashboards which report on threats and should be monitored, actioned, and reported on in KPI metrics ideally. So just on a side note here, I do have an upcoming 30 question set on AI. So just remember to subscribe so that you get notified when this question set will be released. Question 4. Can you tell me about a time when you were making security recommendations to a stakeholder who was highly resistant and didn't want to implement the changes? How did you deal with the situation? So there's no one answer fits all, as they say, but the interviewer is looking for your approach to differences of opinion, as it's a very common factor in security. I often answer questions like these by saying that I often use references to other organizations that may have been impacted by a similar issue, which caused a fine or a breach. I often mention to stakeholders that doing a test before doing a full rollout of a change is a form of, I use as a form of bargaining, and I usually deal with each objection that they may have as it comes along. I may take some time to consider and come back to the objector so that I can review further, much like a judge would do. So in this type of question, you're just trying to sound reasonable, that you have an approach, that you're not trying to cram your opinion down on the person that's objecting, that you are a reasonable person, but that you do have a basis for standing your ground on holding a security opinion. Question 5. What method do you use to assess security risks? So in this one, you could mention a risk assessment model like NIST's Risk Assessment Framework, or RMF, which assesses threats, vulnerabilities, probability, and impacts. I would mention the 5 risk management steps, which are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. ISO 31000 is another very common risk management framework that uses a risk matrix for qualitative assessment. COSO and COPIT are an example of some others out there. Question 6. How do you keep up to date on the latest security threats? Some information sources out there that I've seen which work quite well are vendor security alert mailing lists, like coming from Microsoft or Oracle, CSERT and CISA advisories, regulatory agency press releases, like from the FBI and from the ENISA, which is the European Security Advisory Agency, and MITRE CVE alerts. I may also mention keyword alerts in Google Alerts, which you could configure, and then monitoring the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, which are usually updated periodically with the latest application type risks. I'd also mention here that CSOs and managers fear zero-day vulnerabilities in the wild and being on the wrong end of a pointing finger in the boardroom. Hence, having vigilant, informed, and proactive staff is a high-value commodity. So with this kind of question, they're looking for somebody who is proactive, go out there and find the information rather than waiting for the worst to happen. Question 7. Can you explain to me what a WAF is and what are some of the benefits? The WAF, or Web Application Firewall, is a type of firewall that filters, monitors, and blocks HTTP traffic to and from a web service. Its primary benefit is that it can deal with attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and other attack methods that are commonly seen in the OWASP top vulnerabilities, the top 10 vulnerabilities. So take some time to familiarize yourself with those vulnerabilities as they commonly appear in various question sets, and you will see mention of things like XSS or cross-site scripting, or as I say here, SQL injection. But there are a number of others that you should be alert to. Question 8. What do you understand by the term shadow IT, and how would you deal with it? So shadow IT refers to unauthorized and unsupported type software and services that employees may install on the network or on their machines. An example might be something like DeepSeek or some other AI type tool that you can install on the browser, but there are many, many others. So this type of issue is really a policy and process issue. I would raise it as an incident and follow the incident management process. In most cases, I would notify the offender of the policy violation and refer the employee to the acceptable use policy. For more serious offenses, I would escalate the issue according to the company policy. Question 9. Can you tell me about any tools you may have used to detect vulnerabilities? Well, it's important to think about application and infrastructure vulnerabilities. Some tools that come to mind are Nessus, Rapid7, and Qualys, and then there's Veracode for code vulnerability analysis. It's worth mentioning that in my experience, when I mention Veracode, interviewers usually drill down and ask about things like static code analysis, SAST, dynamic code analysis, DAST, and software composition analysis. So it would be a good idea to know what they are and know the differences when it comes to code analysis. Question 10. What would you say are the top security threats to organizations today? Well, out there I would put in supply chain risk, AI-powered phishing, shadow IT, cyber resiliency, and securing emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, and blockchain. I recommend researching reports like the Verizon IO and IC3 reports. The links are in the description at the end to get more information on these top threats. You'll find with security that really you need to be self-enabled in terms of having done the research and the legwork and kind of anticipating questions based on what the topical issues are and that are being reported out there in any given year. If you like the questions so far and want to join the community, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. As I mentioned before, we should be coming out with the list of 30 AI questions in the next release of interview questions, so look out for that. Question 11. How do you evaluate someone who wants a new type of BYOD? So BYOD, as you may know, is bring your own device. So in this case, I would conduct a risk assessment using a methodology such as NIST SP 830 or 1822 guidance. Particular attention I would pay to controlling downloads on the device, keeping software updated, separating work and personal data on the device, authentication, encryption, and remote wiping. I would then ensure alignment with existing BYOD policies that you may have and potential integration with MDM platforms or mobile device management platforms. I'd probably research here what the top MDM platforms are. You could find them in the Gartner report or other sources there on the web. I would also mention that many bring your own devices may be integrated into existing MDM platforms like Microsoft Intune and JamF Pro, which can speed up integration. I would take a look at each or some of the other products out there just to have a few names of products on the top of your head. Question 12. What would you say security's role is in the SDLC cycle? So software development lifecycle is a heavily integrated, or security rather is heavily integrated, or should be heavily integrated in the SDLC cycle. I would say our biggest role is to ensure security by design is implemented from planning to through the operations and maintenance phase. So typical tasks I would see being defined, it would be things in security requirements or security NFRs, conducting risk assessments, designing controls like things like segregation, data loss prevention, data minimization, scanning code using tools like Veracode, getting involved in the pen testing process, configuration file review, logging and service, making sure rather that logging and service monitoring is set up. I might also mention ensuring compliance with standards like GDPR, PCI DSS, and conformance to API security standards as required. Question 13. What does a blank screen mean when you try to connect to it on a port? So this can be a bit of a tricky question, but it's testing your knowledge of ports and connectivity. So this would indicate a successful TCP connection, i.e. that the port is open and listening. I was asked this question before, and the first time I heard it, I did get it right, but I was guessing. Some of these questions can be deceptively simple, but they are testing that you have a practical background in security. So doing practice exercises can often be a helpful tool as you plan your journey along in the security space. Perhaps doing Telnet sessions or SSH and those type of things, making sure you have some practical experiences of working with devices makes the difference for some of the security hiring managers that you may come across. Question 14. Give me an example of a security product that you installed recently and whether you ran into any problems. So this is testing your hands-on knowledge and your ability to work through problems. One example in my experience was installation of a SIEM service. So connecting log feeds from hundreds of infrastructure devices was challenging in my case due to firewalls, access control lists, lockdown operating systems, and then filtering extraneous traffic and the availability of an integration engineer to help in the process. So some of these issues that do arise when you're running into installation or integration of products and services in the network. It's good to have a few relative experience there to relate to when you're talking to the interviewer. Kind of demonstrates that you're walking the walk. Question 15. Can you talk to me about any application authentication methods you've worked with when working with third parties? So in this case, you could talk about OAuth 2.0 or SAML, which are common application authentication models. So these are where API services can be accessed by third parties, which are granted an access token. Microsoft Entra ID is an example of an identity access manager, which supports OAuth identification and can be used to manage third-party access. This concept of third-party security comes up very strongly in the last 2 or 3 years. Third-party risk is very high on the list in terms of concerns, and appears in many of the reports that I mentioned in a previous question, the FBI, IC3 reports. So it's good to know how you would go about from an application and an infrastructure standpoint and how to secure those third-party services and network access. Question 16. Have you worked with any cloud SIEM tools, and can you tell me about any challenges that you've encountered? So a possible answer here would be to focus on popular cloud-based tools such as CloudWatch and GuardDuty in AWS, while Azure uses Microsoft Sentinel. And typical challenges that you might see are the complexity of integrating disparate device services and connecting them in the multiple cloud environments. Another issue is alert fatigue, and then the cost of ingesting large volumes of data. And perhaps the most burdensome is the time involved in tuning data, which can often lead to months and years and sometimes never get fully completed. Question 17. Can you describe any experience you have with hardening systems and issues that you may have encountered and how you dealt with them? So one hardening approach is to use the CIS benchmarks tool, which are available for over 25 vendor product families. Common issues including breaking services unintentionally by using these hardening activities, such as disabling a port or disabling a service account. Another one is the time required to configure, test, and monitor ongoing compliance, which is not to be underestimated. Question 18. Let's say you receive a pen test report that highlights cross-site scripting as a critical issue on a web server. What is it, and from your experience, how would you fix it? So, cross-site scripting, or XSS as it's abbreviated, is a web security vulnerability where an attacker injects malicious client-side scripts, usually JavaScript, onto a trusted website, allowing them to steal session cookies, or hijack accounts, redirect users to malicious sites, or deface websites. Common mitigations I would throw in there would involve working with the developers to sanitize input using code libraries, escaping data before output, and setting a content security policy which restricts where scripts can be run. So I would consider reviewing the OWASP top 10 web vulnerabilities and preparing yourself to talk about them and the recommended remediations. These are kept on owasp.org and are really quite useful in terms of a reference point for any future interviews. Question 19. Can you describe any experience that you may have had with DLP systems and particular features that you've worked with? So common top data loss prevention systems include ForcePoint, Cisco Umbrella, Trellix, and Symantec. ForcePoint is an example of a cloud-based system which does rapid data discovery and classification across the enterprise. It uses AI behavioral analysis to ID risky behavior and block data exfiltration over multiple channels such as email, web, and file transfer. DLPs also feature enforcement policies which comply with regulations like GDPR and PCI DSS, and can even tag source code to protect it from being sent outside the organization. So really it's a good idea to know the different channels that DLP uses and some of the different products that I mentioned here, so that you have something to talk about in potential interview questions. So question 20, I actually got asked a couple of years ago and I had to think about it before I answered. So in this case, the question was, what would be your approach to handling 15 risk assessments which are currently due to be completed? So the answer is testing your project management skills and your understanding of risk management. Security people are very busy after all. I would take a risk-based approach to this kind of problem and seek agreement with stakeholders on a prioritization plan. So this may look like evaluating the criticality of risk assessments due, evaluating available resources, seeking agreement with project managers and project sponsors on timelines, and reviewing with line managers. I think the important thing is here that you have some kind of an answer ready, that you more or less you don't throw your hands up in the air and just say something like, I don't know. The fact is that many security organizations, you can be extremely busy and have lots of tasks, so your multitasking ability will be tested in most environments.
Are you looking for expert help with security candidate screening? You don't always have the time or expert second opinion that you need. Then I have a new and exclusive service offer that you may be looking for. I offer flexible interview support plans to supplement your interviewing capabilities. You get a choice of 4 plans shown here, which give you the flexibility and options that you need for your next round of interviews. So as an example, the most popular plan is the Gold plan, which provides you with the candidate technical report based on a pool of 60 questions. From this question set, I can deep dive on app dev or cloud technical questions, or both according to your needs. You also get a team player psychometric type report, which is based on 12 common indicators of teamwork mindset, which I'm sure you'll agree is crucial in any organization. Of course, if you want even more, the Platinum Plan offers more time, more questions, and more deep dive areas per candidate. And of course, that plan doesn't expire. If you want to learn more about my offering, get a current price on the credits, don't hesitate to send me an email to paul@data-privacy.io. The contact details are here on the screen. Thanks.
So question 21. Can you discuss your understanding of data privacy by design and how it may be applied in practice with development teams? So there are generally recognized to be 7 principles by design that you should know about, one of which is privacy embedded into design. Here you could talk about ensuring that minimum amounts of personal data are used in the design to achieve objectives. You could also consider discussing technical controls like anonymization of data, data masking for application views, API security using OAuth 2.0 and TLS version 1.3. You could also talk about privacy impact and state assessments and logging using a SIEM SOAR solution. So it'd just be good to familiarize yourself with privacy by design, particularly in context of GDPR regulations, which have obviously appeared since 2018, and they continue to be a factor in most software designs in the current day. Question 22. What is your understanding of a zero trust security model? And discuss any challenges that you may have experienced using it. So zero trust is a 5-pillar security model where the core architecture assumes no entity inside or outside the network is trustworthy by default and requires strict verification. The pillars focuses on technologies such as multi-factor authentication and identity access management, security policy enforcement on devices, network segmentation, API security, and security based on data classification. I would say that there is a high complexity involved with mapping out data flows and user permissions in order to make zero trust work. There's also issues with legacy systems that don't support authentication protocols like mainframes. I only mentioned a few here, but there are other factors in implementing zero trust security model. But note that this is one of the buzzwords of the last few years, and you should be expecting some kind of a question on most security interviews today, and even consider putting something in your CV/resume if it's not there already. Question 23. Can you talk about 2 or 3 disadvantages from a security perspective of AI services in the workplace that you can think of? Some common disadvantages I've seen include exposure to data leakage for staff who may be using ChatGPT prompts, which may include disclosure of company confidential information being inputted in the command prompts. Another issue is that governance of AI training data used in dev environments can become challenging as AI can bypass data anonymization by inferring identities from multiple sources and using them in training data. It can also be more difficult to delete personal data, which is no longer required as the model has to be retuned, which can be technically challenging. Question 24. What is a man-in-the-middle attack, and can you give me an example of one? So a man-in-the-middle attack is when an attacker intercepts communications between 2 or more parties with the intent of misusing the information. A common form of attack is eavesdropping on public Wi-Fi communications that you might find in coffee shops and libraries. So where attackers are listening for personal data, login credentials, credit card details, etc., anything that they may exploit for personal or financial gain. Question 25. Can you give me an example of some common credential attacks and briefly how you'd consider mitigating the risk? So there are several common ones, including dictionary attacks, password cracking tools like Loftcrack, and credential stuffing, which inserts stolen usernames and passwords into the system's login fields to achieve an account takeover for fraudulent misuse. Mitigations I would consider using including passphrases, passwordless login, biometric or multi-factor authentication. So it's worth knowing, of course, that passwords on their own are vulnerable and should be phased out if possible, or supplemented at least by a second factor authentication. I want to draw your attention that there is a video on password security on my channel at dposolutions.privacy. It's well worth taking a look at that if you want to delve into more of the types of password technology that may be used to supplement security in your environment and help you for interview questions, of course. So question 26, what in your opinion might be possible early signs of malicious activity on the network which may need to be investigated further? So in my experience, increased account lockouts, desktop security alerts, notifications that pop up, I suppose, on your desktop, significant unexplained slowdowns of systems, including desktops and servers, changed file name extensions, unexplained network traffic to external addresses might all be indicators. Of course, it's not limited to that. There are other indicators that maybe data is being exfiltrated to other entities outside the organization, and then increased alerts from SIEM or SOAR tools that may be coming from particular sources on the network. It's good to have some kind of an answer ready for this. It's a very common question and something you may run into in your career at least a couple of times over the space of a year or two. So question 27 alludes to third-party risk. The question is, what security controls would you consider for offshore developers who are doing software development on the network? In this case, I would be looking at placing these developers in remote access security policy based on zero trust access. So looking at things like multi-factor authentication, VPN tunneling, time-bound access, endpoint security on the remote devices, IP access filtering, enforcement of secure transports like SSH, and on the monitoring side, session recording tools from products like Zscaler, and on the threat detection side of things, tools like CrowdStrike's Falcon XDR, known as Extended Detection and Response Service. These might be some of the things that we consider to kind of isolate and contain that third-party risk that you would get from developers. Question 28. If you're creating an incident response policy, what considerations would you have in making it? So in this case, I would look at incident definition, i.e. what is considered a security incident in your organization, then categorization of incidents based on system or function criticality and their potential impact. I would also look at recovery objectives for each function and asset, then defining a CERT team with support contracts and emergency response SLAs, and defining the DR testing process and post-incident debriefing analysis process. If you can remember to think of a couple of these things during the interview process, you probably won't go too far wrong. You just need to have a picture in your mind of what an incident response policy would be, and one that would be based on NIST or one of the other ISO, perhaps, response types policies that is a formal framework. Question 29. What does the term software-defined perimeter or SDP mean to you? Can you give me an example of a tool you might have worked with? So SDP is a zero trust framework that controls access to resources based on identity and forms a virtual boundary around network resources. SDP authenticates devices as well as user identity and is governed by an SDP controller. This means that the wider network is not discoverable and hence less vulnerable to attack. SDP was developed by the Cloud Security Alliance. Some notable providers include Cloudflare Zero Trust and Palo Alto Networks Prisma Access. So question 30, can you talk about your knowledge and experience working with the DORA regulation? So DORA, or Digital Operation Resilience Act, came into effect in 2025, and it requires ICT and suppliers to implement a 5-pillar concept which covers ICT risk management, incident reporting, digital operational resilience testing, and third-party risk management and information sharing. So I would encourage you to check out our DORA regulation primer video on our channel for more information on the regulation. It goes into quite a level of depth and detail, and it's important in terms of it's a newer regulation. It came out after the NIS 2, and a lot of organizations are required or fall under the category of having to comply with the regulation. So I would familiarize yourself with that, and you should be ready for any question if you watch the video. Thanks for watching the video, and remember that there are companion documents to go with this video, including a Word version of the presentation, which includes all of these questions in a convenient format for hiring managers and candidates to use in their next round of interviews. There's also a link to a security assessment form, which hiring managers can use to assess candidate performance on a range of technical and behavioral metrics. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.